right, welcome everyone to GW4W Wine and Tea Wednesdays. It is a delight to be here with everyone. We hope everybody's doing well in first month of 2021. I am delighted to turn the conversation over to co-host Dion Johnson, the womanologist, GW4W Advisory Board member, executive coach and champion of women's leadership, particularly healthy women's leadership. So Dion, pleasure to be here with you again today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mim. And as usual, a huge thank you to you and the board for your vision and for your leadership and for this amazing platform that's literally touching lives and leadership around the globe. I want to say welcome to our viewers, first of all. We really appreciate you. We really appreciate you watching, whether you're watching live or on the replay. We're just excited that you're here, and we are here in service of you. So although we don't get to interact with you during the broadcast, we really love reading your comments and your questions. So don't be a stranger in the chat box. Now, today our co-host is Kate Nolan, and Kate's a regular here at Wine and Tea Wednesday. She's a GW4W member, and she's a strategic advisor at CIC. That's a health and wellness and fitness firm helping organizations with their employee well-being. So welcome, Kate. As usual, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Dion. It's great to be on.
Yeah. Today's guest is Jane Stevenson. So we're really excited about talking to Jane. She is the founder and director at JS Global. JS Global supports businesses in addressing the challenge of climate change. Now, Jane's got a whole load of experience, over 20 years, I believe, of supporting a broad range of businesses with bespoke approaches to develop sustainable strategies and to understand risk and opportunities when it comes to all things climate. She's here to share some of that understanding with us today. So welcome, Jane.
Thank you, Dion. It's an absolute delight to be with you today.
Yeah, we're really excited about what you have to share. It's a really important topic. To start off with, we know that you didn't start off in this profession, did you? What did you start, and how did you get here? Or how did you get into this professional climate risk world?
Well, it's a great question, because my career has actually taken me from a very different world, the world of international oil and gas exploration. And now, as you say, I am an advisor to global organizations on environmental risk and opportunity, on governance, and on developing appropriate climate strategies. So you could say I'm a very clear example of someone who's a poacher turned gamekeeper. Starting out as an exploration geologist with BP, with the BP's international staff, I was actually trained to work initially offshore in the North Sea, which is a really exciting environment to work in, also quite a hazardous one. And you definitely need your wits about you. And then 18 months later, I found myself at the age of 22 in charge of a gas drilling program in the very southern end of Western Australia, in the middle of the rare Jarrah forest. The Jarrah is an extremely rare hardwood tree indigenous to that part of the world. It was a very fragile biome, and at the time it was threatened by a particularly difficult to manage viral dieback disease. And if it had been allowed to spread, it could have wiped out entirely this vital part of the green ecosystem of that part of Australia. Now, I had to ensure that we collaborated effectively with a very wide spectrum of groups with very different agendas. And that included local communities and Indigenous population, the Western Australian state government, the forest rangers, the botanic scientific community. And, by the way, I had to keep my employer happy too, because, BP were paying the wages. And to ensure both a successful outcome for the project, but perhaps most importantly of all, the main stakeholder of that region, which was the forest itself. So by no planning at all, serendipity. I became a very early adopter in sustainable business practice in the oil and gas sector, and ended up being one of the industry's first environmental specialists. And after that work in Australia was completed, I found myself, again, really not through much planning, but as the sort of go-to person for our exploration programs, which encompassed ecosystem challenges. It did start off as I say, as serendipity, but I have always really loved the natural world and felt huge respect for it. And pretty soon I was able to develop, quite a niche for myself amongst my peers. There was a sort of, it's a fragile ecosystem, send Jane, which did me no harm at all. And actually was something that really fueled my interest and my understanding of where business and the natural world collide. And I went on from there to work in some amazing places. I went from those Jarrah forests of Australia to the virgin rainforest in Papua New Guinea, to coral reef systems in the Caribbean, to the Arctic waters off the northern coast of Norway. And eventually I moved on to another oil company and worked for Agip, the Italian oil major, and developed one of their first ever sustainability-led exploration programs in the Apennine Mountains, which is where the very rare European brown bear is found. And that resulted in that company becoming a corporate leader on something called the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, which is used by investors to make major funding decisions. And at that point, I made a real, career-changing decision. I wanted to work with businesses across all sectors to drive a sustainability agenda. So I decided to take myself out for a year. I went off to do an MBA so that I could really understand business itself. And subsequently, that's how I've ended up where I am with a career in sustainable management and trying to drive a much more successful sustainability agenda in business.
So Jane, picking up on that fantastic life story, you're a friend and colleague of mine, but I didn't know all those stories. Fantastic, great travel. Why now, in the position that you're in, having sort of transferred across from, the oil industry to what you're doing now from the age of 22, great career path, why do business leaders now need to really work on climate change and sustainability? And what do they need to understand about the intersection? And I don't just mean huge businesses, but maybe smaller businesses that many of us watching involved in this program are involved with.
Well, Kate, I think it's particularly important right now. We're 5 years on, in fact, nearly 6 years on from signing the Paris Climate Agreement, which was put forward at the UN climate conference, COP21, in December 2015, and was adopted by 196 countries. So almost every legally recognized country in the world signed that agreement in 2015. This is the legally binding international treaty on climate change. Its goal is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees and preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Of course, very famously, only a year after the signing, the administration in the US at the time took its country out of the Paris Agreement. And fantastic news, this week, we're back in. The US has rejoined the Paris Climate Accord. It's absolutely fantastic news. Brilliant. And the new administration did it on day one of being in power. Amazing to see that priority taking place. But I just want to sort of wind the tape back to that point in 2015. And I think this really is the sort of the real nub of the answer to your question. One of the key drivers of the Paris Agreement itself became clear a few months before the treaty was signed, before the COP21 conference took place. In September of that year, there was a critical speech given to the global insurance industry. The global insurance industry is worth a staggering amount of money. It's now worth something like 5 trillion US dollars. And this speech was given by Mark Carney, who at that time was governor of the Bank of England. And also he had a dual role. He was also head of the Financial Stability Board, which is an international body set up by the G20 specifically to monitor key risks to the global financial system. Now, this speech made absolutely clear the connection between climate change and its impact on our economies globally, on what it was going to do to us in terms of financial risk. In essence, what it did was to absolutely clarify the relationship between climate change and cost in real financial impacts. And as we all know, money talks. I mean, you know, once you can get those two into the same sentence, you get the attention of the world. His key message was that climate change is the tragedy of the horizon. Now, this is a fantastic soundbite. This is an amazingly quotable thing to say. Tragedy of the horizon. It grabs everybody's attention. But what does it mean? Well, what it actually means is that what climate change does is it imposes a cost on future generations that current generations have absolutely no incentive to do anything about. We can just carry on in our lovely world with business as usual, or at least we could. This is what this speech did. It galvanized this hugely important financial sector to really look at what's coming down the tracks and how that's going to affect the world and how it operates. And once climate change becomes a sort of clear and present danger to financial stability, if you don't do something about it immediately and start to change behaviors and change actions, you may well become too late to stabilize the atmosphere at or below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And the impact of that will be catastrophic. Yeah. And now, of course, the world has really woken up to the enormous scale of these global challenges. And climate change encompasses so much. It encompasses the changing temperature, but also nature loss. And we are in the biggest biodiversity loss at the moment that we have ever known. It's the 5th great extinction. And the other aspect is the extreme inequality in terms of society that this has thrown up into the spotlight. You know, the lens has really been shone into those dusty, dark corners that were able to be ignored. So moving to a genuinely sustainable economy will require absolutely transformational change, pretty well across every established industry, but also at every level. It's not just the great big corporates who need to do something about it. It's every business. It's people like, you know, it's down to the corner shop, actually. It's at every level. Jane, we will have to do this.
Can I pick you up there? Because this is a program for women. This is, you know, attracts women from all over the world. Fantastic organization. How can women get involved in this profession with all the sort of, you know, different things we have to, particularly during COVID, but deal with in kind of family pressures and life and living, but listening to your passionate argument there for, you know, we've all got to do something. What about you as women, us as women? How can we get involved in this whole subject?
Well, frankly, you know, there are just so many opportunities, from incorporating it into your working life, if that's how it could be brought to play for you, to looking at your personal standards in terms of how you run your home life. And at the moment, those two worlds have dramatically collided. I mean, we're all doing this from our homes. We're all on screen. We're not in a conference room or talking to each other around a table, much as we'd love to be. So again, we're living through this extraordinary period of a pandemic where particularly people in the professions, are doing most things from home. So there are huge opportunities to really create impactful change at all levels. Become a climate champion for your business. You know, what is your business? What is the company you work in doing in terms of its carbon emissions, in terms of its waste management, in terms of its water management, and also in terms of supporting its employees to understand those challenges and how they can make really sometimes very small changes, little tweaks to their lifestyle.
Well, Jane, can I ask you a quick question there too? Because there's a trend that we've seen here in the US, and I think it goes to internally employees speaking up. And I know you mentioned the sustainability index from a financial perspective. So I think some of the data that we've seen, especially with younger employees or your stars that are coming up through the ranks, really care about this. Like they are much more aware than probably my generation was. And so I'm curious about, from that perspective, are you seeing like the next superstars for industry looking at potential employers and saying, what are you doing?
100%. So I have worked with businesses in an advisory capacity to help them put in place sustainability pillars across their entire portfolio. And one of the things, and I worked with the chairman of the board of an international, actually food supply organization, very, very big business. And this is quite an interesting little vignette actually into exactly what you're talking about. Very forward-looking individual, but his board were not believers at all. They were really, in their opinion, they'd been doing business extremely successfully. P&L was great, bottom line fantastic. We don't need this. This is, why would we? We've got a great business model. But he personally had a real passion for the environment and for a more sustainable world, and also had in his mind, frankly, his legacy. He wanted his legacy of this business to be extremely impactful for the business itself, but also for him, it was a very personal banner to wave. He has grandchildren who were constantly talking to him about what they were doing at school and so on. So all of those things were very, very key elements of his own viewpoint. I worked with him to put in these pillars across the business. It was a great success. We managed to persuade the board that this was basically a good business decision. Good environmental management is just good management. I hate the terms environmental management, green finance. It's management, it's finance. It's, that's the way we have to look at this now.
I remember an old client years ago who was a guy out of the finance district in London. He was out of the city, and he had decided to transition to this, to just like the guy you were describing, just passionate about the environment and about the link between business and the environment. And, he had made this switch, and he was describing how, he really cares deeply, but something was off. Like he was really finding himself not motivated to go to work, not motivated to go and find new business and really help these organizations that were now becoming his clients to really think about ecology. And when we looked at why, he described, I'll never forget how he described it. He said, in my life when I was in the finance district, I just go to these meetings and I slap a bit of paper on the table and say, here's a £12 million deal, or here's a £25 million deal. And, the whole table would nod in high respect of this £25 million deal. And now he says, I'm slapping bits of paper on, but I'm saying our environment, climate change. And he says that they don't look at me in the same way as when I was slapping that money bit of paper on. It's just such a mind shift that this could be this important. And he was struggling to feel, like this issue had the same kind of receptibility around that table as when he was talking about the big money deals. Do you find that? Do you find that people are still slow to understand the gravitas of this issue?
Well, again, I actually think that is genuinely changing, and it goes back to Kate's point and Mim's point about the generation coming through. Just the story of the chairman I worked with, I had a chat with him maybe 6-9 months later after we'd implemented this strategy, and he said to me, it's really interesting, we are now, if we want to get the top talent, we have to demonstrate to them our sustainability credentials. Otherwise, they just we make a job offer and they don't want it.
Yeah.
Now that is an absolute sea change.
Yeah.
So talent acquisition and a lot of the really top talent that people want to bring into these organizations who have the real knowledge in terms of sustainability and environmental management are proving to be women who are very, very focused on this issue, And I think this is just so exciting. It's a very exciting time for people to be coming into this field. And it's going to get more and more and more important. We have COP26 being hosted in the UK at the end of this year, which is it's 5 years on from COP21. The whole focus is going to be on achieving net zero emissions for the planet. It's going to be
what that
huge.
Is, Jane, for our audience. Can you explain what that event is?
So that is the UN climate conference, which happens every year. Back in 2015, it was where the Paris Agreement was signed at the UN climate conference, COP21. They happen every year. The next one is COP26. And we are hosting it here in the UK. The whole focus of it will be on how we make the requirements of the Paris Agreement happen, and mostly through achieving net zero emissions globally. And businesses from the smallest to the largest are going to have plans in place for achieving net zero.
Yeah, well, I love too that there is this very strong tie coming from work. I worked at some hedge funds and was on site at Goldman Sachs running their wellness program many years ago. And so listening to you talk about this, I think there's, this is what's going to push it forward. You have to have the business case. It's, we know it's the right thing to do. Ethically, it's the right thing to do. I'm not a youngster, and I will tell you that my dad, we had a solar panel for our water heater back in the late 70s. And I remember all these things as growing up, this environmental focus, and how many years have we had Earth Day? But I think so much of this now is really, there's this awakening of the urgency, but the financial impact, this burning platform that we're headed towards. And there's just, but the clear tie back to businesses will not, none of us, like, we live on one little planet. And so whatever your quarterly returns are really not going to matter if we end up having, like
so true,
8 Sandys in a row. How is New York City ever going to survive that? Or,
exactly.
So I'm so, my gosh, I'm so inspired by your work and your voice around this. And it's extraordinary. And I think it may be the most important topic as human beings, male, female, across the gender arc. I mean, this is something
absolutely, and I think we've always struggled in terms of, the response to climate change requires significant behavioural change, which is the most difficult thing to achieve. However, look at us now. We're in a terrible global pandemic, which has prompted a reaction unlike anything ever seen before. Governments and businesses have responded with a total reorganization of work, of travel, of social culture. These are transformational changes that seemed utterly impossible a year ago. We could never have said we would do this. Right. And the pace of change, absolutely extraordinary. But there is one thing I would say, and I think this is very important. Across all businesses and the corporate world particularly, there is a risk that, as we come out of the pandemic, it's all about reboot, revitalize, get everything going as quickly as possible, and rebuilding, therefore, through short-term easy fixes, maybe even, lifting environmental standards so that we can just get back on there. That, I mean, I don't think that will happen, but there is always a risk. However, this is a unique opportunity. And it's all about rebuilding the whole of society for a healthier future, which is a more sustainable future. I mean, climate scientists, we know we have a mere 10 years available to address the worst effects of climate change. Here we have the opportunity to fix it and deal with that big social aspect that is all about health and well-being, which is what your organization is all about.
Yes. Healthy leadership in all the forms that takes. It is about, our passion is so much about, we've traditionally looked at a successful leader as somebody that brings in X amount of dollars, helps the bottom line grow. But we know where we are environmentally. We know that if you're just going this quarter, that you are not picking your head up and looking at, well, what does this look like 5 years or 10 years down? So this idea of healthier leadership, it starts with the leaders. Like, basically, how do you make moral decisions? Last year, we had Dr. Letterly on, and she talked about the science of sleep, which you think, well, how does this relate to what the conversation is? Except there's research that shows that leaders, any of us as leaders in our lives, communities, top of businesses, doesn't matter, that when you get adequate sleep on a regular basis, not only are you physically and mentally healthier, you actually make better moral and ethical decisions. And so this deep tie-in to how do you as a leader take care of yourself? How do you show up every day at work? How are you role modeling for your team? Actually does play into this conversation. Because if you're not showing up as a healthy leader, how do you lead through these incredibly complex problems to get us to a more sustainable future?
There's no doubt that there's a massive amount of work to do. We all need to be looking forward to that tragic horizon. I mean, I really love that phraseology. But let's just end with this, because we're running out of time. When we finally get past this COVID blip, mildly, what have we learned over the past 12 months that can really help us to apply new approaches going forward regarding climate change?
Well, I think what we've learned is we can change. We can change, and we can change quickly. I mean, if an English expression is when the chips are down, and it just means when you literally you're up against that you've got to make a change to whatever's happening or it's disaster. And we now know we can actually do this. So the sort of excuses in the past, which have been, it'll take us 10 years to change, and it's like sort of trying to change the tanker, and it takes 5 miles to turn it around. We actually know that's not actually the case now. So I think that's a huge learning that we can take away from this extraordinary period of our lives. And we have to make our response absolutely relevant. And I believe a really important point is to make it purposeful and purpose-driven. Mm-hmm. Anything that might, from a business perspective, anything that might drop into what we could call a greenwash category will be seen straight through. I mean, just before this crisis, the coronavirus, public protests around the world were absolutely dominating the world in terms of the climate. It was all about, do you remember Extinction Rebellion? Greta Thunberg, the public voice. That will come back, because despite the appalling tragedy of the pandemic and the absolute focus on public health in terms of that one issue, the climate change issue has not gone away at all. It has continued to rumble on. I mean, I don't know if you in the States are as tuned into the amazing work of Sir David Attenborough as we are, but at the moment we've got him on our screens every Sunday night, and only the last episode of his latest series, which is called The Perfect Planet, I mean, absolutely hammered home how much is happening, the rate of change in terms of a warming climate, and the absolutely devastating impact if we don't do something about it. And I think we have all the information now that we need to be able to understand what the challenge is, and we actually know we can change.
Yeah, and for anybody that hasn't seen any of David Attenborough's videos, if you have Netflix, they're on there. I think his whole because I did watch the testimonial one, basically like, what is my career? If you don't know who this man is and you are interested, go and watch it. Go and watch what he puts out. He is, if there are saints in the world, I honestly believe that man is one of them in terms of how he does it, but he's also hopeful. He's also hopeful at the end and said, yes, we have huge challenges, but yes. And it gets back to, it takes all of us at leaders at different levels. It takes all of us stepping up and saying, together, we are going to make this a little bit better for those of us that are here, but even better, a better future for our children and our children's children.
Wow, that's a really powerful thought to end us with, Mim. And it looks like we are out of time, but you know, this is such a powerful conversation. I know it's one that we have to keep having, and you know, keep really asking, how is it that we are contributing to the problem and becoming solution to the problem? So Jane, you've given us masses of food for thought, and we're going to be talking about this for a long time to come, I'm absolutely sure. Thank you. How do our viewers get in touch with you if they want to know more?
Well, they can look at my website for the advisory business, and that's jsglobaladvisory.com. Or I'm sure through your network, I'd be very happy to share my email address. So if you'd like to do that, I can let you have all the details, and then people can, can find me through that route, which might be the easiest way for people on, on today's call.
Yeah, fantastic. So hope you enjoyed this conversation. Next week's guest is Jana Novakova-Stara. She is the founder of a Czech Wellness Institute, and she's a mum, and she's got a burning passion for the wellness of her nation. She'll be sharing wellness principles and insights on how her dual roles go together. So don't miss that. I really want to thank you for watching this broadcast. You know, if you've enjoyed it, let us know in the chat. Let us know what you're taking away. And if you have any questions, we definitely will visit those after the broadcast. So, and also, if there's a topic that you'd like for us to cover, if you think that there's an issue that we really ought to be talking about, then please do let us know. We really want to know what you want us to bring in terms of content. We care about